Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Road to Emporia. I'm really excited for this one. Bike setup is key for this event, and we thought who better to bring in for this than our own expert, Josh Poertner. Today we're going to be going through aerodynamics, why it's important for somebody like me that's definitely not winning any bike races, and how that might be able to help you optimize your setup too. So we'll bring Josh in and get our conversation started. All right, awesome. We brought Josh in today to talk through some of our recent wind tunnel testing with some videos coming out on that real soon. But with me not winning the race, not even looking to have a competitive time, thought, well, why does the wind tunnel really matter? Why does aero savings matter for somebody like me? So one of the topics that we really hit on was wind speed versus ground speed. So we just thought it'd be good to have you kind of go through how aerodynamics impacts somebody that's maybe not going 50K an hour.
All right, yeah, so since as long as I've been doing wind tunnel, we've had people say, why 50K an hour? Why 30 miles an hour back in the old days? And I think the thing that you need to think about is, you nailed it, wind speed versus ground speed. And this is like, we think about airplanes landing and taking off, right? Say an airplane needs 200 mile an hour or 200 knot wind speed to take off. Well, if you can achieve that by taking off into, say, a 20 knot headwind, you only need 180 knot ground speed. And so shorter runway, shorter takeoff. When you're landing the plane, same thing, you're landing at a lower ground speed, so it's safer. That's why you'll notice you're watching things about aviation, or when you fly, sometimes you circle the airport seemingly unnecessarily to come in from another direction. That's so you can land into the headwind, or the most headwindiest wind possible on that day. And the same thing happens with cyclists, right? You might have a 20 kilometer an hour ground speed, but if you're riding into a 20 kilometer an hour headwind, that's a 40K an hour airspeed, right? And so for the people who say 50K an hour wind tunnel doesn't happen to me, well, it absolutely does. And I know you've been doing some modeling around Unbound to show just how, actually, I'm not going to say common, but how not uncommon a 50 kilometer an hour headwind actually is.
Yeah, I think there's a stretch from last year's course that's about 30 miles in the first 75 miles. That's all one direction, and then another couple 20-mile stretches in the back half of the course. So depending on if your wind is coming out of the south or the north, you can really have a long period of time that you're facing some pretty severe headwind out there. So last year it was really rainy, not too windy. I think most years the headwind's going to play a lot bigger factor. So thought that might be a good way to model that savings. So one of the things that we found when we went to the wind tunnel and tested was position. I think everybody knows how important position is, or at least that knows that it is important. So we tested some aero bars versus kind of ducking down into a more aero position without the aero bars. At 50K an hour, we found the aero bars to be 120 watt savings. So if you have a 10-mile stretch in one of those areas with just a 18 mile an hour headwind, kind of my average speed, another age grouper maybe average speed in that section, doing about 180 watts was 12 miles an hour. Well, right there you have a 30 mile an hour, 50K an hour wind speed. So you get to capitalize on that 120 watt savings. That comes out to almost 14 minutes of saving, or a little over 14 minutes of savings in that. So that is an absolutely massive time savings. And if you can do that twice on a day, I don't know anybody who's ever ridden 200 miles and if you told them 30 minutes before they were done that they could get off the bike, wouldn't take that. So the nutrition component is also something I think we talked about quite a bit. Huge. Just another way to kind of wrap our head around that savings. Do you want to talk a little bit more on the nutrition side?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to be clear, so we're saying 120 watt savings. In this case, you would require an extra 120 watts to go the same 12 miles an hour. There's two ways to look at this, and this is where the nutrition piece can get interesting. You can think of it as, I'm going to go the same speed on fewer watts, or I'm going to go faster on the same watts. And I think for an event like Unbound, for someone like Travis, I'd say really for anyone who's not top 10, your goal is really going to be going the same speed on fewer watts, and then at times maybe, like the last couple K, right? Because we all like to race at the end. You might want to go faster on the same watts. Well, when you start thinking about it in those terms, you can bring in this nutrition element. And this was the thing I think we really cracked almost 20 years ago now with CSC for these Grand Tour stages. We could save 600-800 calories a day in a tour stage. And that steps up day after day after day. That's calories you're not eating, recovery you don't have to do. It's less strain on your gut. I mean, there's just so many benefits to it. Well, in an event like Unbound, savings at this level, I mean, you're talking, well, you've done the math. Yeah. I'll let you take it. It's huge, potentially huge.
Yeah, so going through some of the positioning, equipment, number plate placement, all of those things, I think we can probably, on my setup, eke out about 30 watts on average. If I take 13 hours, it's almost 1,400, just over 1,400 calories that I would have to consume extra. So on a 7,000 or 8,000 calorie day, not having to do an extra 14 gels, I'll take that.
I don't think anybody likes gel that much.
No.
So that's a huge component, right? And certainly for stage racing or other, you think of being able to do that every day as marginal gain on top of marginal gain. But I think this is one, I mean, we can honestly call this is not a marginal gain at all. 1,400 calories on a 7,000 calorie day. That's a lot.
Yeah, and it might take me from 1,000th place to 950th place. But really we get the race finished, and that's the main goal. So, We'll go through all sorts of different videos here on equipment testing, places to put your number plate, hydration packs. I know that's a big one. So a bunch of these different things can really add up and save you some real time and real energy to make sure that you're not 150 miles in and bonking because you couldn't possibly eat enough and get through that headwind section that's miserable just a little bit faster.
And we're also going to talk about socks. Just you wait.
Definitely going to talk about socks. Another topic that we have really hit on with kind of some of our findings from the wind tunnel is what to do with that information, right? We talk a ton here about tire pressure and chain efficiency and obviously aero, but when do we focus on aero? When do we focus on tire pressure? When is one more important than the other? So yeah. I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, and this one's interesting to me, and it's a little reminiscent of the Paris-Roubaix. We talk about the focus there. Thinking one of the things that's missed in Roubaix so often, I think, is the strategy around the wind. You think of that course is mostly south to north, but it kind of has these diagonal areas. You think if the wind's coming out of the north, most of the pave sections are north-south. And so you'll get one type of race. And if it's coming out of the west, which happens about half the time, you get another type of race, right? Because now all of the action has to happen in those east-west sections. And people just kind of try to hang on in the pave sections because you don't have as much advantage. I think for here, what we really want to be thinking about is, the incredible nonlinearities of the aerodynamic forces, right? So like we talk about, it's, your power required to overcome aerodynamic drag is related to the cube of your speed. So, you think of it's twice as fast, has 4 times the drag, requires 8 times the power. And the rest of the stuff that we talk about here, rolling resistance and drivetrain friction and some of these things, they're linear. So, twice the speed, twice the watts lost to rolling resistance. That's a whole different story. And that's why, in those high wind speeds, your percentage of power being spent to overcome drag is going to approach, in your 12 mile an hour with an 18 mile an hour headwind situation, you're like 92, 94% of your energy is just overcoming drag. And so in those sections, when you're feeling it, that's when you want to make yourself as aero as possible and really minimize everything else. I mean, don't stop drinking, and don't say I told you to stop drinking. in those sections, because that's just stupid. But, don't futz with your seat pack, and don't sit up and stretch your back if you don't have to, and try to drink from your more aero, your front bottle and not your back bottle, or from your hydration pack if you have it. I mean, really focusing on aero in those sections is going to save you huge amounts of time. And then when you're on tailwind sections in particularly, right, you're now in a tailwind, you end up going faster than the tailwind. So you still have a net headwind, but it's a much lower speed. So if I give you a 18-mile-an-hour tailwind, you're going to go 22, 24 miles an hour in it, which is only a net, 2, 4, 6, pick your math, mile-an-hour headwind. That's the best time to do all that other stuff, right? I mean, mess with your jacket, move your bottle, move your empty bottle to the rear cage or your down tube cage or whatever the strategy is there. Because in those situations, your rolling resistance and drivetrain friction are a higher percentage than they are on the other times. And so with a tailwind, what you really want to be thinking about now that you're going faster is line choice, right? I mean, you really, even if you need to get out of your, say, aero bars and really pick the best, smoothest possible lines, that's going to help you out more proportionally than it will when you're just grinding away into that headwind.
Yeah, looking for to smash down tire tracks and smooth dirt and stay away from the loose sections. Yeah, that kind of thing. Okay. No, I think that's really impactful from just a, 12, 13 hours out on the bike. There's an awful lot of things to think about. So kind of giving yourself some kind of game plan to think through the day, not just, I got 120 miles left. That makes for a really long day. So having a kind of strategy of how to ride the race, I think really will help mentally too.
100%. I'd add to that too. I mean, really, if you can find a buddy in the crosswind and the headwind sections in particular, right? The tailwind sections aren't too big of a deal, but your crosswind in particular is where you can really pay off to find a buddy to sort of echelon with. And of course, in a headwind, it's even more critical, but I know sometimes it's a little bit harder to find people whose speeds you can match up with, in that headwind. You might find someone, but it's good for a minute or two, and if they're too fast or too slow, that gets a little bit trickier. But really be thinking about those in those times, and then if you need to futz with whatever your equipment, do it in that tailwind section, and if people get a little bit of a gap on you, you'll close that a whole lot more easily than you will in that headwind.
I think that's some awesome advice. Well, thanks for coming on. I think got all these topics answered, and we'll have plenty more to go from here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right, thanks for joining us for another episode of Road to Emporia. Thanks to Josh for coming on and kind of giving us some tips and tricks on how to ride, where to ride, what to look for at different times. It's really impactful to me. I think it's changing the way I'm thinking about my nutrition strategy, my just kind of my pacing strategy, when I'm going to put effort out a little bit more, a little bit less, really just to get to the end of the day. So really exciting. We have a lot more testing content coming out. Next up, I think, is Robert Chung is going to come on and talk with us about different testing strategies, different protocols, how you can kind of test some of this equipment at home. So join us for that one. It's going to be really exciting. Should be coming out here soon.